We continue now at the top of Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph in Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 83a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing a case where a woman makes a neder, and part of the neder is a neder of affliction, but part of the neder does not involve any affliction. So if the husband, let's say, is mefer in such a situation, it's a machlokas amoraim. Does that hafara, does that take care of the entire vow? Does it annul the entire vow? That's the opinion of Shmuel. But the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan is that just the part of the vow that is a vow of affliction, so that part of the vow is going to be annulled, but the other part of the vow will remain. And the Gemara is now in the middle of asking a question on Rabbi Yochanan's view from the Mishnah in Nazir. The Mishnah in Nazir is talking about a woman who becomes a Nazira and she violates the Nazirus. So Harezu, so Feges Esvarboim. So she's going to get Malchus because of the violation of the Nazirus. But the Mishnah continues, Hefer la Bala, let's say her husband annuls that Nazirus, V'hi lo yada, and she doesn't even know that it was annulled. V'hi lo yada shehefer la, she doesn't know that it was annulled for her. V'haisa shosa yayin u'metamel mesim, and she's drinking wine, and she becomes tamei meis, she violates the Nazirus. So in that case, eina sofeges esor boim. So she's not going to receive the Malchus in such a situation. And so the Gemara says, if you're going to say that, let's say you have a situation of a neder, part of it is affliction, and part of it is not a neder of affliction, and the annulment goes only on the part of the neder that's the neder of affliction. So when it comes to Nazir also, not everything that a Nazir undertakes is a neder of affliction, meaning to say, maybe from wine, which that causes affliction when she refrains from the wine, so that part of the neder should be annulled according to Rabbi Yochanan. However, min chartzen min zog, but let's say from the seeds of the grapes or from the skins of the grapes, that's also part of the Nazirus, but lo heferla. But there, maybe the annulment shouldn't work for her. To halo islat because there's no pain over there. It's not affliction over there to refrain from having the grape seeds or the grape skins. And in that case, she should receive Malchus. So this Mishnah shows that once the Nazirus is annulled, the entire Nazirus is annulled, whether it's a part of the Nazirus that involves affliction, or whether it does not involve affliction. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Yosef says, Ein Nazirus lechatzoyin. When it comes to Nazirus, you can't have a half a Nazirus. Meaning to say, when it comes to other Nedarim, so if included in the Neder, there's some things that involve affliction, and there are some things that do not involve affliction, so that's a situation where we're talking about where the annulment can be partial according to Rabbi Yochanan. But when we're talking about a Nazir, so Nazir is going to be something which either you take the whole thing, or you take none of it. And therefore, if there's an annulment of the Nazirus, the entire Nazirus is going to be annulled. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaye, so Abaye said to Rav Yosef, HaKarbon l'chatzi Nazirus ika, just from the implication of your language, Rav Yosef says there's no Nazirus l'chatzoin, so are you suggesting, this is what Abaye is saying to Rav Yosef, are you suggesting that there's a carbon for chatzi Nazirus? Elomar Abaye, rather Abaye says, Ein Nazirus l'chatzoin, v'ein carbon l'chatzoin. There's no Nazirus halfway, and there is no carbon in terms of Nazirus halfway either. The Ran over here explains, Amar le Abaye ha-carbon l'chatzi Nazirus ika, Bitzmi, are you implying that there's a carbon for chatzi Nazirus? Demi dekamrinon ein Nazirus l'chatzoin. What Abaye is focusing on is that when Rav Yosef says there's no Nazirus l'chatzoin, Veloka Amar ein chatzoin b'Nazirus. He doesn't say there's no chatzoin at all by Nazirus. Mashma, so what Rav Yosef implied was the b'Nazirus atzmahu deleka chatzoin, that by the Nazirus itself there is no going halfway. Hayesh carbon lachatzi Nazirus. But Rav Yosef implied that there would be a carbon for a chatzi Nazirus. What would be a case of a chatzi Nazirus? Kegon shenadra umansa tesvav yom. What Abaye means, according to the Ran, is as follows. Let's say she made the neder to be a Nazira, and she counted 15 of the 30 days. V'hafer lo bal, and then the husband annulled it at that point in time. V'nimsa mevatel tezvav yom haboim. So comes out the next 15 days of the Nazirus, those are all nullified. Avol tezvav yom shemonsa kvar lo nekru. But those original 15 days, they weren't uprooted. Dekaimalon beperak misha amar hareini nazir debal megas gayas. Because we established in Meseches Nazir that the husband cuts off that Nazirus. Umetama Abaye, so Abaye is asking on that, Heich Tavi carbon, al mixas minyan. How do you bring a carbon on just part of the count of the Nazirus? So Elomar Abaye, so rather Abaye says, Ein Nazirus l'chatzoin, v'ein carbon l'chatzoin. Really, not only is there no Nazirus l'chatzoin, there's no carbon either. Ki heichidei Nazirus l'chatzoin, she'efshar lohafer mixaso. Just like there's no Nazirus l'chatzoin in the sense that you can't annul part of the Nazirus and the rest remains. Dehainu yayin, that's the case of the wine, v'tayosar adayin bezog v'chartzen, where she's still going to be osir to have the skins and the seeds. Hachanami and carbon l'chatzoin, the same thing is true, says Abaye, it extends to the carbon as well. As long as the husband annulled even during the time of the Nazirus, and now the future days are no longer, they're nullified. A carbon at that point in time, she will no longer bring a carbon. Bishvil mixas minyan Nazirus shemon sakvar, because of the portion of the Nazirus that she counted already. Shelo amra Torah lahavi carbon lachatzoin ela al minyan Nazirus shalem. Abaya says, again, just like there's no Nazirus lachatzoin, the Torah would not tell one to bring a carbon on half a Nazirus. The Torah only instructs one to bring a carbon on a full Nazirus. And the Gemara continues, Meisveh, we have the following question. It says, Ho'isha shenadra b'nazir, if a woman becomes a Nazira, ve'frisha behemta, she separates her animal, v'achar kach hefer labala, and then her husband annuls the vow for her, mevia chatas ha'of, she brings a bird carbon chatas, ve'ena mevia ola ha'of, but she does not bring the bird carbon ola. And so the Gemara now says, V'yamrin carbon l'chatzi naziris. If you say like Abaya says that there is no carbon for chatzi naziris, so amai mevia chatas ha'of. What is she bringing? Why is she bringing this carbon chatas ha'of? But the Gemara says, V'yalamai, but what else are you going to say? Yesh carbon l'chatzi naziris. Are you going to say that we do bring a carbon for a chatzi naziros? So then shalosh behemas boile sui. She should bring 3 animals as carbonas. She should bring the chatas, ola ushlamim. She should bring all of the carbonas, the chatas, ola, and shlamim. Elali olam ain carbon l'chatzi naziros. So the Gemara says, rather, really, there is no carbon for chatzi naziros, just as Abaya said. The chatas ha'of demasi, and the only reason she's bringing this chatas ha'of, mishum the chatas ala suffik, because the carbon chatas can even be brought in a situation of doubt. And the Mefarish explains, Mevia chatas ha'of, she brings a chatas ha'of, mishum nazira sha'asta kodem shefer labala, because of the days of the naziris that she kept before her husband annulled the vow for her. The came into mefer bala have a chatzi naziris, because when her husband annuls the vow, it becomes like a chatzi naziris. The ilu ki mefer bala no mefer elamasha asid lavo, like the Ran said, when the husband annuls the vow, he's only annulling the upcoming days. Avol meikara eno mefer, he's not annulling what happened before. The kodem hafara kedekoi, whatever happened before the annulment, that stays. Meseches Nazir Kadaik the Baal Megas Gayas over there, Meseches Nazir. The Gemara there learns out from this that the husband, he's Megas Gayas, again, he cuts off the neder. So therefore, let's say he annulled for her, but it turned out that she violated the Naziris earlier before the Hafara, so then she's going to get Malchus. And it said over here, v'chatas ha'of, she brings this carbon chatas ha'of, which the Gemara initially thinks indicates that the carbon is brought. You have a situation even of a carbon being brought for chatzi naziris, but the Gemara instead says, no, ahachi ma'isa d'mishamachi en etzrichel havi v'lo klum. The hafer law, really, again, she doesn't need to bring any carbon, like Abaya said. In a situation where there was an annulment in the middle of the naziris, there's no requirement for any carbon. The only reason she's bringing the chatas ha'of is because of what Rebbe Elazar HaKafar said. The Amar HaNazir maybe chatas al shetzir atzmo min hayayin, because he holds that the whole reason why a Nazir even brings a chatas is because he pained himself, he abstained from wine, and really a person shouldn't abstain from things that are permitted. Umeviyazu chatas ha'of nami, and that's why this lady also, she brings a chatas ha'of ala safik, because a chatas ha'of can even be brought ala safik. Because again, she did pain herself, she abstained from wine at the beginning of the neder until the time of the hafara. Because we find in general the chatas ha'of can be brought in situations of doubt, so it can be brought here as well. The oledis shehipila, for example, let's say a woman gives birth, she has a miscarriage, but she doesn't know whether it really qualifies. What was it? Was it considered a vlad or not? Im chaticha, im vlad. She doesn't know if it's a chaticha, is it considered a child? Mevia chatas ha'of, there also, she brings a chatas ha'of, it's able to be brought on a suffix. Since in general a chatas ha'of can be brought for suffix, so here also she brings the chatas ha'of, but really again in general you wouldn't bring a carbon in such a situation where it's a half nazirus. And the Gemara continues, Eitzvei, we have a question from the following brayso. So this is going to be a question on Rabbi Yochanan's view that we mentioned above. Rabbi Yochanan again said if you have a neder, and part of the neder is a neder of affliction, but a portion of the neder is not a neder of affliction, so if there's an annulment, the annulment only goes on the portion of the neder that is a neder of affliction, it does not go on the other portion of the neder. And so the brayso says, Ha'isha shenadra b'nazir, a similar case as above, a woman, she makes a neder to become a nazira, v'nitmis, and she becomes tameh, she violates the nazirus by becoming tameh, v'yachar kach hefer la bala, and then after that, her husband annuls for her the vow. So mevia chatas ha'of, ve'ein mevia olas ha'of. She brings the carbon chatas ha'of, but she doesn't bring the olas ha'of. And so the Gemara now asks on Rabbi Yochanan, V'yamrin mefer l'mesana ve'ein mefer l'she'ein mesana. If you're going to say that the annulment works on the portion that is a vow of affliction, that is the inoi nefesh, but it doesn't work on the part of the vow that is not inoi nefesh. So here also the Gemara will ask, the portion of the Nazirus to abstain from becoming tamei, that's not inoi nefesh, that should never have been annulled. And we'll take a look at Tosfos, V'yamrin mitumas meis de les lotzara lo heferla. If you're going to say like Rabbi Yochanan, so tumas meis does not involve any affliction, so there should be no annulment for the tumas meis. Utei asura gama achra hafara l'tumah, so the isra for tumah, that should be fully in place even after the hafara. Now Tosfos asks, Vikash, if you're going to ask, Amayin Meshani, why don't we give the same answer as before? Ein Nazirus l'chatzoin, k'dim Meshaninon l'el. We said earlier there's no such thing as a partial Nazirus, so you can't say that the prohibition to become tamei, that remains in effect. The whole Nazirus has to be undone. So Tosfos suggests, V'shema le'el, maybe earlier, Hainu gabe chartzen, when you're talking about the situation of the grape skins or the seeds, D'yevshel Nazirus below Isser chartzen. You can't have Nazirus without the prohibition of chartzen. Aval evshel Nazirus below Isser tumah, but it is possible to have Nazirus without the Isser tumah. That can exist. Hilkach tumah yesh lo din b'fnei atzma. Therefore, tumah can be considered like a separate halacha. V'havin nazir mitumah l'chud. It's possible to be a nazir just from tumah. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Gimel Amud Beis.